The Safety Task Force podcast is arming you with the necessary tools to combat safety in our fast-paced, dynamic world. Our interviews bring you the latest and greatest safety solutions from industry experts. If you're new to the industry or looking for ways to expand your knowledge and stay up to date with global safety trends, this podcast is for you. Welcome back to another episode of the Safety Task Force podcast. This week, I have John Costello, president of Cherry's Industrial Equipment. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks for having me, Emily. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. We really appreciate it. John, give us a little bit of background on Cherry's Industrial Equipment, how you got involved in the industry, stuff like that.
Yeah. So the company was started back in 1983 by Bud Cherry. And at that time, it was to do ergonomic equipment. It was a specific type of machine known as a pallet inverter.
Okay.
I know that your audience is probably shaking their head of like, what the heck is that? It was a machine designed to flip product over. So the initial application was to recover damaged product. So just imagine bags of fertilizer or bags of sugar. The forklift driver would puncture the bag, trying to get into the pallet, and it would always happen at the bottom of the load.
Okay.
So what they had to do is bag by bag, 50-pound bags, unstack and restack it. And the inverter did that very simply of flipping it over. It would give them access to that bottom bag. They would replace it and flip it back around. Very, very specific, just a niche industry. And but the company's grown from there. So in 83, it was a very small company. There was just a couple of people, a lot of Johnny Appleseed, planting seeds here and there, seeing if a tree would sprout. I didn't come on board until 1994. And in 94, I came in as kind of a sales assistant, and I don't know if I'm just the last man standing, lucky or good or whatever it is, but here I am as the president and the owner of the company. And along the way, really, this product line has kind of evolved into, just not pallet inverting equipment, but pallet handling equipment. But still, the applications or the issues that we're trying to solve are labor or back injury related. Ergonomics. That's really been the big thing. How to do it faster, quicker, and safer.
Okay. Has Cherry's always been focused on safety?
Well, I think we've always been focused on helping the employee, to not, hurt himself. I mean, the big thing early on was to find customers that had problems revolved around workers' compensation claims. So how do we make the employee safe? How do we prevent injuries? But that has evolved over the years into not only the employee being safe, doing the application or the operation. It's now you've introduced a piece of equipment into this, and how do you make sure that that piece of equipment doesn't do harm to the customer?
Right.
Now, early on in like the 80s and 90s, there wasn't a lot of concern, from these companies. There was a lot of guarding that went around it. There weren't a lot of fail-safes. And then kind of what happened or evolved over the years is the bigger companies, a lot of pharmaceutical companies, a lot of the big food companies, as they kind of became global companies, a lot of the Europe is a little bit further ahead than we are in the U.S. as far as safety standards and protecting the employees. So a lot of those standards kind of made their way from overseas to the U.S. The other thing that's a little different here in the U.S. is it still is the responsibility of the purchaser, not of the machine builder, to safely guard the equipment. And things are changing a little bit there, but there's still really no like legislation or edicts or anything out there that says, the machine builder is responsible. But we have seen a really big push over the past couple of years of customers that are buying the equipment to get their S managers involved, so environmental health and safety managers involved. And I would say in the 80s and 90s, that title didn't exist. And if it did exist, that person was wearing the hat for the day. It was like, I didn't show up for work one day and I walked in the next day and I'm now the safety guy. I don't know how that happened. Now there are specific people that are handling that.
Right. So John, once you took over in 2014, where did the biggest growth come from for Cherries?
Yeah, so for us, and I don't know if other companies have kind of found that is so you're in an industry that is constantly evolving, but what we found is competition was coming in. So other companies were building equipment that was similar to ours. And what we really focused on, this is where our growth was, is really focusing on the customer. What is the problem? Instead of just solving the problem by just, building a stock piece of equipment, we kind of reached out and it's really our philosophy and how we sell is we really ask a lot of deep probing questions. It's, really tell us exactly what you're trying to solve. Just not 90% of it. What would it look like if you could solve 100% of it? So from 14, what we found is, really just about, maybe more than 70%, maybe 80% of our equipment are snowflakes. They look like, they're similar, but, there's something different to them,
Right.
So this customer over here may say, look, can you build the basket slightly bigger? Or this customer over here can say, look, I'm handling a very specific type of pallet. Can you do this? And this customer may say, look, we have a specification because we're a Fortune 100 company. Can you build it to this way? And prior to that, it was like they would bring it in and they would modify it themselves, which was kind of crazy. I don't know if they just didn't know if it was possible, but now they're getting something that when it shows up, the safety guy is happy, the engineer is happy because it meets a requirement. So that really has been the change. The other thing that we're finding is a lot more automation. So, people are looking to add conveyors to the system and the least amount of touches. So It used to be, just a standalone machine loaded and unloaded with forklift. Now we're getting more and more customers saying, how do we do this where we just put it on a conveyor? It goes down line into your machine, downstream, gets stretch wrapped, and on the other side, they just pick it up. And so they're finding obviously a cost justification, but now the operator's barely involved in it, and they're going on to do something that's a little bit more productive than changing out pallets or recovering damage or whatever it may be.
Okay. So as I was trying to learn a little bit more about your company, I noticed you guys do a lot of risk assessments. Can you explain to me what a risk assessment is and what that process looks like?
Yeah. So again, because the company has really been evolving, so just imagine it's a Fortune 100 company. And so before some of these companies, before the machine can show up in their building, they want to know what hazards that machine may cause. So what I mean by hazards, you could have pinch points. You can have stored energy. So a lot of our equipment is hydraulic.
Okay.
So when you turn off a circuit, you have stored energy in a hydraulic hose. So what happens to that stored energy? They're looking at like arc flash. Arc flash is something where, if there was a short circuit in the panel, what would happen? If somebody opened up that door, so it's stuff like that. So again, earlier, that was always the responsibility of the customer, and it still is. But what they're coming to us and they're saying, can you help us identify these risks? So before the equipment shows up in our building, we want to know how to mitigate it. So let's just look at like one of our machines, because they're constantly loading it and unloading it. The ideal situation would be to put, hard guarding all the way around it, and to put a gate across the front, right? And just have that gate be locked.
Yep.
Well, it's not, you have to kind of manage safety with productivity. So if they're loading this thing every minute, it would be a pain in the butt to open up the gate, right? So the safety guy he wants it to be like Fort Knox, right? That nobody can get hurt, right? But the operator wants to be able to use it, right? There has to be this kind of meet in the middle. So the risk assessment, what it does is it says, okay, if the operator is using it, what are the risks? If the maintenance guy is doing maintenance on it, what is the risk? And if the machine is just at rest, what is the risk? And it's a matrix. So what you would do is you would identify the risk from, let's say, 1 to 5. 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. And so if it's a 5, what would you do to mitigate or reduce that risk?
Okay.
So if it's a pinch point while the machine is operating, well, if you have hard guards on 3 sides and a light curtain across the front, and I don't know if the audience know what a light curtain is. A light curtain is a safety device with beams that are separated by 3/4 of an inch. So if you break that beam with your hand, the machine stops.
Okay.
So if the operator were supposed to walk into that space while it was operating, the machine would stop, right?
Right.
So if there's a pinch point, that pinch point is mitigated.
Okay.
Now for like the maintenance guy may have a different requirement where he has to get in and do some work on that machine, right? So how do they make sure that they can lock it out and tag it out so nothing bad can happen? So that's another risk that would be there. And then, like I said, stored energy. So what happens if the machine is at rest and again, somebody cracks a hose or breaks a hose, what happens to that oil, right? So some companies, they go, there's different levels of safety, and it used to be categories from category 1 to 4. I know I'm getting kind of deep. I won't go much deeper to the audience, but now it's a PL requirement. So it's PL, and like most of our equipment would meet a PLD. The highest is PLE.
Okay.
Which it's like nuclear facilities or PLE. We don't go that far.
Okay.
But a lot of the companies that come to us, they said, look, we need you to do a risk assessment and we'll help them. But there's companies that will certify the risk assessment. There's outside independent companies that will do that. We don't do that. We just kind of help the customer. It's still their responsibility, even though we're helping them with the risk assessment. Because I said the machine builder is not responsible. It's the purchaser.
Right. So are risk assessments a requirement or more of a recommendation?
It's becoming more of the norm. It's not. I think it's still kind of guided by. So the bigger companies, we're seeing that from almost every big company. The smaller companies, they're starting to catch on. It's again they have a safety guy who may not know that it's a problem, right? Sure. So what we're finding is they're looking for us to kind of make recommendations. So as we're in the discovery stage, we're asking a lot of questions of, okay, when it gets there, how the electrical panel is built, does that make a difference? I'll just share just a quick thing. There's something called UL 508A. And again, I'm going to bore most people with this, but it's how an electrical panel is being built, right? Okay. So years ago, that UL 508 was only required in certain states. The state of Minnesota was one, parts of California, and I think in Cook County, Chicago. I mean, there weren't a lot of places. And what it says is this electrical panel is certified with a number stamped on it, and you can go to UL site and see it, but it means that it meets the minimum requirements for, panel building. Now, the crazy thing is there's a lot of companies, they're not even meeting the minimum requirement that are building electrical panels. So we've been doing this since 2003. So we're meeting this standard. But the nice thing is a lot of companies, they don't know that's a big thing until we bring it up. And then they start asking, what the local codes are. And then they find out, hey, that's really important. We're glad that already has that in there. Okay. Right. And really the concern is, if somebody's not building it to the minimum requirements, maybe the components aren't even UL approved. There's a lot of documentation behind it. And people are always worried about an electrical hazard. An electrical hazard, is not going to injure somebody. It can severely injure them or lead to death. I mean, that's something that you don't want to mess around with.
Right. Do you feel like a big part of your job then is kind of educating your customers in all of this? Like when they come to you with a need?
It's really interesting. The internet is fantastic. It really is. It gets people to your door and they're very educated. But our job is even to kind of take it even further, right?
Yep.
Is to really, and it can make some people uncomfortable, because when I say we ask questions, we ask a lot of questions.
Sure.
Because there's nothing worse than sending a piece of equipment in and then finding out, shoot, we didn't do this. Is there any way that we can retrofit it? Is there any way that we can add this? And the answer is always yes, but it's always more expensive afterwards.
Yeah.
Definitely. So we do a ton of educating. Yeah, we do a lot of seminars. We do a lot of one-on-ones. And obviously, today it's a lot harder to go in on site and do the assessments or the reviews there, but we're doing a lot of stuff virtually. We almost on more than half of every project that we're working on, we involve the safety person very early on.
Okay.
We found that leads to tremendous success. If we know what their specs are, because sometimes the engineer will know what the corporate spec is, but not what safety is looking. So by having both those people on the call, they're very excited when the machine shows up, because they can just basically plug it in and test and train, and away they go.
Right. And that's great.
It is. Yeah, it makes life easier for everybody.
Well, John, are there specific regulations that your products directly support?
Well, the thing is, the regulations are, there's certain terms that are out there that, what people are looking for is, it used to be an EN, regulation, or an ISO regulation. But a lot of that, what we're finding is really around the safety of it. And I mentioned UL, so that's on the electrical side, but sometimes UL can certify an entire piece of equipment. Mm-hmm. It's a tough question to answer, because we can meet, certain regulations once the customer approaches us and tells us what the specification is. Okay. Like I said, there's not a standard that's out there that says, hey, you build it to this and you're covered, right? Got it. Otherwise, we just would be building everything to that. Overseas, They have something called CE, and if it has the CE stamp, then it meets this. We don't have something like that here in the U.S.
Got it. Well, during COVID, the food safety has become a pretty hot topic. So what are businesses in the packaged foods, bakery, meat processing, or frozen food industries doing to keep food safe right now?
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. It has been, I think for a lot of those companies, it's been just a huge challenge this past year. First of all, keeping people safe in the plant. Second of all, just trying to keep up with demand. Sure. There was just surge, when COVID surge happened, right, everybody was panic buying, right? You couldn't find stuff on the shelves, right? Yeah. So what we found is that there's probably a couple of good answers to that. One is, so many of these companies are sanitizing. They're doing all the safety protocols that you hear on the news and everything else. What we found is they're also going kind of a step further, and they're worried about their supply chain. So as stuff comes into their building, what sort of packaging, what type of pallet is it on? Okay. Is it on a dirty wood pallet, right? So how do we get that off of that wood pallet onto a plastic pallet? And so we're helping a lot of these companies develop closed loop systems. And a closed loop system means that the pallet that you're using internally is clean and it's reused. So imagine a plastic cutting board that you put in your dishwasher, right? Mm-hmm. So it's clean, right? Right. I'm not saying a wood one wouldn't be, but you're not going to take a wood one from the garbage can and then just bring it into your building, right? Right. So a lot of these companies are doing this. They're looking at ways to prevent, pathogens from coming into their building. And they've been doing that for a while, but there's really a big focus on that. And so how have we been helping with that is our equipment's used to transfer on and off pallets. And then we also do pallet washing systems. So you put a pallet in one end and it's like a car wash. It goes through, it washes, and it sanitizes, and then it dries. And so when it comes through on the other side, they can reuse that again. And they know that it's clean, and whatever's come in stays on the outside. And then whatever's going out on the shipping, and they really kind of segment these buildings. So that's one answer there. The second answer is back to like that employee safety. We've had a lot of companies that have come to us and they're just saying, hey, look, we're kind of moving some equipment around. And what we found is this equipment that was sold back when doesn't have the right guarding on it. Can you retrofit it? So we've gotten a lot of those phone calls. And then we've also just gotten a lot of phone calls of just like, we just can't find people. It's just really hard to get, there's a labor shortage. And then, with some of the shelters in place. So we're just finding that people are looking to be more productive and to really kind of separate people out. So, we're looking at a lot of ergonomic equipment, whether it's lift tables that are made from stainless steel so they can clean them and wash them, or just other ergonomic equipment that usually an employee would be doing this operation.
Okay.
Or 2 employees or 3 employees, they're now trying to do it with 1 employee. And so again, they can kind of social distance it. And then obviously, just whatever they can do within the plant to just make sure that, things are clean and sanitized.
All right. Well, John, what are some challenges that you think your customers will face in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I think that we've been hearing this for a very long time, is that a lot of companies are just really looking to automate everything. There's talk of robotics here and there, and we've seen that, but I think there's still some challenges at some of these plants. I mean, first of all, you go from, I think anything in life, you go from crawling to walking to running. It's hard to go from crawling to running, so there's this intermediate step. And so we get a lot of customers that are saying, look, we really would like to do this robotically. And then they're finding that some of the packaging, it can't work. Some of the environments, it can't work. If it's in a freezer or cold storage, or just, the way the product is, it just becomes a challenge. So what we're trying to get our customers to do is just at least to go from, walking or crawling to walking, bring in some more automation, because it is going to be a flip. So you're going to have organizations that are just so used to having, people and laborers do all this work.
Right.
And so now you bring in automation, right? So what's the first thing that you need is you need a different type of maintenance staff, right? You need people that are very, very educated, that they know controls, they know, again, safety, they know some of that stuff. So we're seeing some of that now, where there's challenges. Labor shortages, as I mentioned before, that's going to be a problem moving forward. I mean, these plants, with COVID, I think they really realize is they can't have people, shoulder to shoulder. It just can't work, right? So they've got to figure out ways of distancing, but still getting the same productivity out of it. And then I think the other thing too is that we're seeing a lot of consolidation in the industry. I don't know if that's good or bad. Sometimes with consolidation, there's efficiencies, but it also means that there's really kind of less choices. Not only for the consumer. And then, these mega plants, how are they really going to be operate? Are they going to be good citizens? Are they going to be taking care of their employees? Stuff like that. I'm not saying that they're not, but when you get to a plant where it's got 5 or 6 or 8,000 employees versus years ago where it was 400 or 500, where you thought it was, a big deal. So I think that's going to be a challenge moving forward, is the consolidation of these mega plants, and how do you get them to operate, but still with, safety, the biggest concern, right? I mean, it used to be just kind of in the background. Now it's the biggest concern. So how do you make sure that employees are safe?
Right. Well, John, how will your company adapt to meet the future demands of your customers?
We've started to do this already. So I had mentioned that we're seeing more and more automation, and we're selectively doing projects, where we know the result is going to be what they want it to be.
Right.
But I also think that there's going to be, in the not so distant future, that there's going to be a switch here in the U.S. where they're going to change it from the responsibility being on the purchaser to it being on the machine builder. And so that's going to be a challenge for some small companies. How do you make the investment? What sort of dollars are involved, to get certifications on this? Okay. It's going to be I think, a challenge. But I think really beyond that, there'll be some challenges, but we've been a really good company of being able to adapt. We're very good at listening to what our customers do. We're very skilled at what we do is from an engineering standpoint. And I think like most successful companies, we always say there's paper engineering and then there's the real world engineering. So what we find is that, what we thought was just going to be tremendous, right? The best thing ever built. And then 5 years later, you hear back from your customer that they love it, but hey, it would be great is to do this, or this.
Sure.
So we're seeing that more and more. We have customers that on maybe 10% of the projects that we're doing, they're saying, look, God, we've had this, but we'd like you to do this. Is it possible? And we're like, of course it's possible. So I'll give you just a quick case in point. Customer came to us. They've had our equipment for 20 years. A lot of the fleet is getting old, and they said, hey, we have a requirement that what we want to do is put a full enclosure all the way around the machine and do a trapped key. And you may be familiar with this. So the trapped key means that, is the machine has to meet a certain number of requirements, and then you could pull the key out, put it in your pocket, but nobody can operate the machine until the key goes back in. So for this particular customer, any sort of moving part has to be pinned in place, and there has to be zero energy at the pump, meaning we have to dump all the oil back in, and then lights come on and they can take that key out and they can open it up, right? And then they can operate it. Okay. So, we knew it was possible. Had we done it before? No. Is it an interesting project? Of course. So we've taken those sorts of ideas because of the customer, because of the feedback, and because of their safety or their specifications. And we're now evolving as a company doing that. It's pretty exciting when you can be collaborative with the customer, and follow their lead, but then also say, well, had you thought about this? And had you thought about this? And had you thought about this? So I think those are the things that we're going to see more of over the next 4 or 5 years. But we're excited about it. We're every day we're ready to go with those sorts of challenges.
That's great. Well, John, thanks for your time today. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate it.
That's all for this week's episode of the Safety Task Force podcast. Thanks for listening, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at BeastAgentWN.